Day 372 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Jozzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine, and we'll start off with taking a look at the Russian military losses. And currently, Russia has reached a bit of a milestone here, so sitting at 150,000 military personnel losses. And this is the conservative leaning KIA estimate, because if you include wounded, this figure would be significantly higher. And any realistic assessment of the battlefield dynamics would support this. For instance, apart from Russia officially mobilizing 320k soldiers in October, strong emphasis on the word officially, and that was after the initial 190k reserves from the beginning of the war. Then, compounded with Russia never actually stopping the incoming mobilization stream of soldiers via shadow mobilization techniques. And that's the situation whereby Russia offered loads and loads of sweet-paying contracts to civilians and promised them untold glory and spoils of war, like looting their own washing machines or toilet seats. Then compound all of that with the fact that Russia has only been making marginal gains. In fact, they've technically had a net loss of captured land since the Ukrainian liberation of locations like Kharkiv and Kherson, which all signifies that these Russian soldiers had to go somewhere, and they did go somewhere, and it's reflected in the numbers here. And these numbers are truly staggering. But back to it, so quick peek at the hardware. So we are looking at 2 tanks, 20 APVs, and 5 artillery. And notice the wide gaping disparity between tanks and APVs for Russian losses right now. That's because Russia has been having some severe limitations or supply issues on tanks. They cannot produce the things fast enough. So Russian forces instead storm into minefields, largely under-equipped, just utilizing APVs instead. And it's not so much that Russia is having trouble producing new tanks in whatever quantities they can muster, but rather when they do, they're taking the cheap and nasty approach by restoring old Soviet-era tanks instead. That's right, folks, the T-62s. Then we'll move back across to the map and we'll start out in Russia again, as we sometimes do. And we'll take a peek at Moscow, where a Prima radar system has been positioned on top of this hill, just 10 miles southwest from downtown Moscow. The footage was taken by a local in the region in what appears like such a karmic return for Russia, where they previously forced Ukraine to protectively cover their own airspace with air defense systems and proactively. Now Russia is forced to redeploy their own dwindling battery of air defense systems, and the physical land mass, or land area, I should say, of Russia is just too large to defend its entire airspace. Oh, case in point, just yesterday, Ukraine managed to fly a drone to within just 60 miles of Moscow downtown, undetected that entire way. So it was about 460 kilometers or about 300 miles, which is getting everybody asking the question to Russia now. What air defense doing? Then we'll move back across to the Ukrainian map, and we'll start out in the rather northern Donbass region of Crimea. So Russia lost another T-90M tank. So this is the latest and greatest of what they really genuinely have available for tanks. Somewhere in the forest southwest of Crimea. It was knocked out by an anti-tank mine, for which this is just the still photos from some drone footage. Then we'll move across to the Bakhmut area, so lots certainly happening here right now, not the least of which is the muddy season, really starting to take its toll. But the most important aspect of this location right now is the supply route. The northwestern supply route, that is, utilized by the Ukrainian forces. as there is a very serious threat of Russian artillery fire, although at present it is still operable. But if Russia continues with successfully getting closer to encircling Bakhmut, this will restrict the possibility of a withdrawal of the Ukrainian forces from the city. So, for instance, if I pull out the ruler, the remaining withdrawal gap length is about 4 kilometers or about 2.5 miles. And the gap size itself constitutes around 75% of the circumference of the Bakhmut encirclement there. So if the encirclements, say, were to reach maybe 80 or 85%, so that's about 3 kilometers, maybe about 2 miles approximately, maybe a smidge less. And also, of course, depending on the nuances of the situation on the ground, Ukraine would actually choose to withdraw, as opposed to getting trapped there instead. So it appears the next day or two could be extremely crucial to the outcome of Bakhmut. Then we'll move down to Avdiivka, so zoom out, zoom in, where there was another masterclass on the attack from the invaders through the minefield in the Avdiivka direction. And that was all she wrote for that offensive. Then, in a generally similar story, when we take a look at Vuhledar, no changes here, and the reason for this is it's just a literal minefield. As you can see, the anti-tank mines from the green circles, and of course the surrounding destroyed Russian heavy armor as well. So perhaps Russian commanders in the south, the region there, thought that sending in cannon fodder waves, wave after wave, was a great, albeit a compassionless, way to clear the minefields. But it's not that simple. These things are littered and scattered throughout everywhere, and can be shot into position from Ukrainian forces from miles away. At least some variants that they have access to can. So being an invading land force in an open space can certainly present some unique challenges, to say the least. Then we'll move across on the map to Zaporizhzhia, in particular the city Zaporizhzhia. So there we go. So it's not Russian occupied, obviously, and we'll just get the map to load up. So a Russian missile strike occurred here in the city of Zaporizhzhia, presumably designed for taking out energy infrastructure, but instead it partially destroyed a residential apartment block. Now the attack was likely carried out with an S-300 missile in what I would consider just a heinous act. Then a bit further south, a Russian missile hit an educational facility in Orikhiv, so right there. And it was an empty, non-military target. But does that matter to Russia? No. Even Russian mill blogger Igor Girkin said just the other day, Russian forces will locate any large building or warehouse, target it, hit it, then with no actual confirmation of what was in the building, they then send this information up the chain of command saying it was a Ukrainian unit or barracks with hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers taken out. And obviously, at this point, I've got to say, in this war, I've noticed that Russia is getting very good at lying to themselves. So good, in fact, they just seem to unquestionably believe it. Then, speaking of Russian lies, well, there were some reports of explosions in occupied Crimea today. So the Russian Ministry of Defense said they shot down 10 out of 10 drones sent their way. Specifically 6 shot down and 4 taken down by means of EW or electronic warfare. But I don't know. From what I could gather, Ukraine sent less drones Russia's way, maybe a few, of which at least one hit a military unit in Bakhmut. So there it is, halfway between Simferopol and Sevastopol on Simferopolska Street. And locals reported hearing the explosions as far away as Yalta down there. Then we'll move across to some news for today. So Slovakia is considering providing Ukraine with 10 of their 11 recently decommissioned MiG-29 jets. And the decision will be made in the upcoming few days or so. But I kind of get the feeling that Slovakia have already made their decision to provide the jets to Ukraine. And these jets were only recently decommissioned on official papers. Winky face. Because I'll never forget, early in the war last year, Slovakia was one of the first countries to provide the S-300 air defense systems to Ukraine. So I even thanked a Slovakian buddy at work of mine of that. Then in some other news, so it appears some inside sources have claimed that the United States is making efforts to rally support from its allies to potentially impose sanctions on China in the event that China provides lethal assistance to Russia's ongoing conflict in Ukraine, which is important because in my current humble estimation, China cares a lot more about not receiving those economic sanctions than instead helping Russia in this useless war they started. So fingers crossed China will bend the knee. Then a couple of funnies to run it off with today, guys. So due to the long-range precision weapons Ukraine has at its disposal, such as the HIMARS munitions, it has forced Russia to no longer have the traditional large ammo dumps they had even just 6 months ago. It's too risky. So as a replacement, instead, they have this. So now this is quite common. Instead, they've been dumping smaller quantities in an uncoordinated fashion on the side of the road and then telling their units where they left it later. So naturally, surveillance drones pick them up and either A, drop a load on them, or B, relay the coordinates to precision artillery to take them out. But I find it a little amusing because it's literally ammo that's just dumped on the side of the road, making for Russia really giving a renewed meaning to the term ammo dump. Then in a final funny, so on the wider battlefield, decoys exist. Some are wooden, designed to look like an air defense system, or others are inflatable, but either way, they're always generally quite detailed and really good decoys. And Ukraine does quite well with these to confuse the invader. But let's see what Russia is working with instead. So it appears Russia cannot even afford a decent decoy version of their weapon systems, which I also suggest in many instances their actual weapon systems they can't really afford on many places on the battlefield either. So instead, the guys on the ground, Russian troops on the ground, are making these homemade tree stump and green mesh decoys in order to make this one look like a self-propelled howitzer, so an SPG, a big old gun on wheels, or trucks. But maybe instead the Russian soldiers that created this want to make it look so bad and so obviously fake, as they have a few artillery shells or a backpack stored in there. No, even suggesting that sounds dumb, because with all of those cope cages we've seen, they probably think that even this is a hard-to-spot fake. And I've got to say, this is just not becoming of a 21st century army, and an army, no less, that's meant to be the second best in the world. So thanks for watching, guys. Please leave a comment, subscribe, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.